I'm going to start by confusing everybody.
What's new? You asked for it, Rabbi. We come here week after week, all of us, trying to be unconfused.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a little bit more specifically, because the other day, I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, somebody asked me about the Pirkei Avos shir.
Oh, yeah.
So that was already a few months ago. And it's no longer Pirkei Avos shir. So that gave me the thought that maybe I'll confuse everybody and go back to Pirkei Avos today. So one of the things we learned in Pirkei Avos is Ezehu Ashir. Who is wealthy? Hasameach bechelkoi. Somebody who is joyous in their lot. Now Maharal has a very interesting insight into this particular question. What do you mean, who's wealthy? Well, what kind of question is that? Do we struggle to know who's wealthy? You go look, see the house they have, you see how much money they spend, you see how much tzedakah they give. Surely that's how you know somebody's wealthy. Why do you have to come with a whole philosophy that wealthy is somebody who is samech b'chelkoi? Just say simply, wealthy is somebody who has X amount of money. That's considered wealthy. Why does it come from a different perspective? So the Maharal says something absolutely phenomenal. And it's directly relevant to what we're going to learn today. He says there are two kinds of wealth. This is a mind-blowing concept, actually, when you think about it. There are two kinds of wealth. There's the wealth that comes from money, and there's the wealth that comes from within. Within. So what does that mean? I mean, that's not such a surprise, because that it's somebody who is joyous in their lot. So obviously that implies that their wealth is from within themselves rather than from the things that they have in their bank account or the assets that they own. No, he's saying much more than that. There is something that is called Ashir Be'etzem. That means that it's the nature of this person to be wealthy, as opposed to financial wealth. So for example, it's not exactly the point, but I'll just use it to take us one step closer to the point, that sometimes you get people who'll say, this is my wealth, and they'll point at their family. These are my children, this is my wealth. So that's one step closer, but that's not Asher Be'etzem. That's not somebody who is fundamentally wealthy at their core, because this is still a matter of there's something in my life that is giving me that sense of wealth. So it happens that it's not materialistic. It so happens that it's not as simplistic as money. But still, there's something in my life that's giving me a sense of wealth. No, the Maharal says it's deeper than that. Ashir Be'etzem means they are individuals who their whole persona is wealth. In the same way as you can get a person who is Samech Be'etzem. Their whole persona is joy. As you can get a person who is Achaston Be'etzem, that their whole persona is goodness and kindness. In other words, there are things in life that we gain either through experience or through hard work or through learning. And then there's certain things that are essential to who we are. To put it slightly differently, there's the difference between somebody who relies on inspiration and the person who is self-motivated. Very different. Very different personalities. The individual who is reliant on inspiration, I often think about it's like the child on the playground, when they play on the monkey bars. So the child is dangling there from the monkey bars, and they've got to swing themselves to be able to get to the next bar, and if they miss that bar, they come crashing down. That's what it's like when you're reliant on inspiration. Right now I'm on a high. Why? Because I read something this morning, I heard a podcast, I woke up on the right side of bed, the sun was shining, whatever it is. Something made me feel happy, something gave me inspiration. And now that inspiration is going to run out unless I get hit with another bout of inspiration. So that is unsustainable. That's the reality. It's unsustainable. You can't spend your whole life swinging from monkey bars. It doesn't work. Eventually you get tired. Eventually you got to let go. It's not possible to live our whole lives expecting somebody else to do it for us. Someone's going to make me happy. Something's going to make me happy. This person is responsible to inspire me, etc. I think I once told you before that we once having a conversation at Shul at the Kiddush. And I was saying something along these lines, that the single most important thing in terms of our growth as Jewish people is not to wait for inspiration, but to generate motivation. It's a big difference, right? Between inspiration, which is a passive, reliant position, and motivation, which is a proactive and self-driven experience. So we're going on and on and on. It was a whole long conversation. At the end of the conversation, one of the guys says to me, "Rabbi, inspire us." Okay, thank you very much. Clearly, just really got the message across. So there are two realities. There's something which I can rely on, or I am reliant on an external force, or I can make something part of myself. Now, even though Asher Be'etzem, the way that the Maharal describes it, sounds like it's something which either you're born with or you're not born with it. There are people like that. There are people who live in absolute squalor, but they are Asher Be'etzem. That's just their persona. Whatever they have in their life, they can turn it into their castle, their diamond. Doesn't matter what it is. They're able to do that. And you look at it and you think, okay, well, some people are just gifted that way, and there's nothing I can do to become like that. Well, if that were the case, if that's what we believed, then it would not be a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Because the purpose of a Mishnah is not to tell us there are a whole lot of interesting people around. We're going to tell you about them. Some of the interesting people are already wise, and some of the interesting people are already rich. Some of the interesting people are already strong. That's not the purpose of Pirkei Avos. The purpose is to say, this is what you should aspire towards. That means that it is possible for a person to shift. That it is possible, even if I believed up until this point, and it could be even a core belief that I have, that I need others to give me inspiration, wisdom, guidance, direction, etc., whatever it is. If I believe that my whole life, it doesn't mean that I cannot change to aspire to become Asher Be'etzem, to become fundamentally wealthy. So in other words, even if we were brought up our whole lives on a diet that you need to have this and you need to have that, you've got to keep up with the Joneses, and you've got to upgrade your phone 2 months before the upgrade is available because, chas v'shalom, you don't want to be left behind the curve. So if we were brought up that way, it's possible to change and to reach a point where my simcha comes from within, where my motivation comes from within, where my inspiration comes from within. How do you get there? So the Gemara says something which is really intriguing. The Gemara says, Ein Asher Ela. Anybody know this line? Ein Asher, there's no person who is wealthy, Ela except Be'da'as. There's no person who is wealthy except in knowledge. And then the Gemara continues, Ve'ein Ani Ela Be'da'as. And there's no such thing as a person who is poor, impoverished, except in knowledge. Now, some people understand this very simply, and that means that wealth or poverty is in your head. And it's a true thing, because sometimes you encounter people who have massive amounts of money, but in their heads they live poor. And other people who have much more basic assets and wealth, in their minds they're wealthy. So at a glance, that's what the Gemara is telling us. The Gemara is telling very simply, it's all a matter of perspective. It's all a matter of how you see the world, how you understand the world, how you position yourself. So for anybody who's ever read the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that's exactly the concept. Where essentially there's two different ways of looking at the same amount of money. One sees it, you've got to be frugal and whatever. Another one sees it as this is opportunity, right? So they're two different ways. Ein Asher Be'das and Ani Ela Be'das. That's the simple explanation. But today we're going to take it deeper and try and understand a little bit better. Here we've got the Maharal telling us that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says that Ezu Asher Sameach B'chelko, who is wealthy, the person who's joyous in their lot. So he says, what is Asher? Is Asher Be'etzem, somebody who's fundamentally wealthy. You can get there. The Gemara says you can get there because Ein Asher Ela B'da'as, that if a person has an experience of da'as, they could become an Asher, they could become truly wealthy. Why would that be? So what we're going to learn today is that the fundamental difference between being an Asher, a wealthy person, and an Ani, a poor person, is nothing to do with what you have. Nothing. Which is, of course, what the Mishnah implies, right? That Eisa Asher Somech Bechelkoi, the person who finds simcha in their portion. That means that the connotation of being wealthy is not what you're getting, but how you live with what you have. Okay, so let's understand this. In conventional thinking, if I call somebody wealthy and I call somebody else poor, without even thinking about it, subconsciously, I've created a relationship between these two people. What's the relationship in very simple terms? So what's the relationship going to be? It's going to be giver and receiver, without even thinking about it. That's how I've classified these two people. The wealthy person has resources. The poor person lacks resources. So if I'm going to put them into a relationship, the wealthy person is the one who's giving to the poor person. What does the Gemara tell us about the relationship between a wealthy and poor person? It says, Yoiser mima shabala bayis oise im he'oni oise im balabayis. That more than what the rich man does for the poor man does for the rich man. How's that even possible? So he gives him a whole lot of things, right? He gives him the opportunity to be compassionate. He gives him the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. He gives him the opportunity to let go of stuff. There are a whole lot of ways in which the poor person adds value to the rich person. But conventionally, you think of wealthy as the person who has what to give and doesn't need anybody else, and poor as somebody who needs and therefore is kind of reliant on everybody else. I once spoke to somebody who said that the reason they want to be successful in financially, the reason they want to be successful, it's a funny angle, but hear it out, because once you are successful, people no longer ignore your phone calls. Right? Think about it. When you see a number pop up on the phone, you're making a cheshbon, yes or no, right? But when the number is somebody who's got the big bucks, you're going to answer that call. You never know what's going to happen. You're going to answer the call. So who is the wealthy person? They don't need us. I'm saying financially, you know, the implication of a wealthy person, they don't need anybody else. They've got what they have. They've got what they need. To the contrary, they're the ones who are empowering others, who are sharing with others, who are dispensing to others. Whereas a poor person, the implication of a poor person is that you are constantly looking for input. Now, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but in the Torah, when it tells us that Moshe was supposed to appoint leaders who were going to help him run the community, so he says that the Hashem tells him you have to choose Anoshim Chachamim V'Duim L'Shiftechem. So Rashi says, what are Chachamim? What is a Chacham? Very interesting explanation of what a Chacham is. If you were to describe a Chacham, bearing in mind that Rashi is the Pshat, the simplest explanation of the Torah. If you had to explain what a Chacham is, how would you explain a Chacham? What's a Chacham? A wise man. That's it, finished. Very simple. Wise person. And it fits the context. You want leaders, you want people who can weigh in on halachic issues. Get wise people. Rashi says something that you would never have expected. He says, what is a Chacham like? It's like an expert on precious stones. When somebody brings him a precious stone, then he has an opinion to give. And if nobody brings him a precious stone, he sits there twiddling his thumbs. That's a Chacham. That's how you see a Chacham. What kind of an explanation is that? Sounds like a Chacham is a very disempowered person. When somebody brings him something, then he's got something to do. Now, when we learned about Chachma, it actually makes sense, because we learned that Chachma is not in our control. We learned that Chachma is an inspiration that comes from outside of me. So that's why very often Chachma experiences occur when we are not expecting them. We are not prepared for them. That's usually when a Chachma happens. Why? Because Chachma is, I don't have the resource has got to come to me from elsewhere. For example, if you're trying to solve a problem, usually what happens to us is we feel like we're just repeating the same things again and again and again. We're unable to solve the problem until we have the flash of inspiration, which comes from where? Beyond us. Comes from beyond us. So therefore, Chokhmah, which is the ability to innovate, is a poor man. The definition of poor is you're relying on something to feed you, something to support you. So if Chokhmah is relying on the flash, the moment of inspiration, you can't create a moment of inspiration. You can't make yourself have a good idea. Doesn't work, right? So you're completely reliant on something else. That is a poor position. Here's another, as powerful as Chokhmah is, and we've described how powerful Chokhmah is. But the reality is, Chokhmah on its own is a poor position. It's a poor position for another reason too. When we learned about Chokhmah, we learned that as dynamic and powerful and compelling and exciting as Chokhmah is, it's always short-lived. It's exactly like inspiration. It's always short-lived. Brilliant idea. Okay, so the euphoria of the brilliant idea is for a few seconds, and then reality hits. You've got to work out, what do I do with this information? So Chokhmah is poor.
Unless you put it into...
If you put it into something, it's not Chokhmah anymore. Chokhmah is poor. So what happens after Chokhmah? What's the next thing that occurs after Chokhmah? Bina. What's Bina? Bina is research and exploration and contemplation and debate and the linking of different ideas that appear perhaps to be disparate, and we're showing the commonality between them. It's a very robust intellectual experience. So is Bina wealthy? Chokhmah is poor. Because Chokhmah relies on some kind of an external impetus in order to exist, and it can only exist short term. So Chokhmah is poor. What about Bina? Is Bina a wealthy experience? It's so much more developed. It's so much more mature. It's so much more real. Is it a wealthy experience? No, why not?
It's still reliant on the knowledge to research. It's still reliant on others.
Exactly. Exactly. So what? Between? Okay. So is it yet wealthy? It's not wealthy, right? Why not? Why not? Because it's the information that I have researched. Book knowledge. Book knowledge means the information lies in the book. But I don't have a resource in myself. In other words, just like when I have a Chokhmah experience, I'm relying on something bigger than myself that's going to surprise me. Either because I have this brilliant idea or because I hear something from somebody else that I've never heard before. Either way, I don't have the resource. The resource is coming from elsewhere. So therefore, the person who is in a state of Chokhmah is in a state of poverty, because poverty means I'm relying on something or someone else. Truth is, the same applies to Bina.
The diet is the good.
Oh, great. So Bina is a wealth of information that doesn't make me wealthy. Again, what happens if a person has millions and millions in their account, but they're constantly craving other things, whatever those other things are? So they've got millions in their account. You know what they say? I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but it's an incredible insight. In our world, between us, and I hope I don't offend anybody by saying this, right? In our world, what is a status symbol in our world? I don't know, you buy yourself a new Lexus. Oh, everybody's like, papa. You drove into the parking lot with a Lexus. You're now the big knacker. That's great. But then eventually you get to a certain level of wealth where a Lexus is fair. Who drives a Lexus? Shemsach. Who drives a Lexus? You have to drive a Ferrari. So the amount of money you need to be able to spend to get satisfaction when everybody around you is driving a Toyota, and you're going to buy a Lexus, the amount of money you need to spend to get that sense of I'm special, it's substantial, but it's not a lot of money. But the minute you get to the world of Ferraris, so now you're not talking hundreds of thousands, now you're talking millions to be able to have a car that will show that everybody, look at me. So now you're driving a Ferrari amongst all the people who drive the Lexus, but guess what? Now you've got all this money, you start hanging out with people who have Ferraris. So now it's not such a chap to have a Ferrari anymore. So now if you really want to be the upper crust, now you have to have a private jet. Now you have a private jet. Now the leap from having a Ferrari to be able to compete to having a private jet to be able to compete, now you've gone from millions to hundreds of millions, right? To be able to have your thing. And then when everybody around you has a private jet, then you have to get a yacht. And the cost differential between a yacht and a private jet, so is that wealthy? That's not wealthy. That is poverty. I'm constantly craving something, need more. Bina is, in a sense, poverty. I have a tremendous amount of wealth. I have a wealth of information in my head. But the fact is, all of the information is Exactly that. It's information. It's abstraction. It's theory. So my day-to-day life, I have to keep going back and reminding myself, what did we learn? Ever had this experience? What did we learn in that year? What did we learn in that year? I have bina. Actually, you remind me and it's back and I can tell you all about it. Just get me started. Oh yeah, that's right. That's what it is. Now I can talk for an hour. I have all the wealth and yet I'm not wealthy. I'm not wealthy. My bank account, in this case, my knowledge account, my wisdom account is full. I'm not wealthy. Ein oshir elo beda'as. A person only achieves wealth in terms of understanding and appreciation. And in our case, we're talking not just about generic knowledge, we're talking about knowledge of Hashem. I only have real ashirus, real wealth, beda'as. When I cross over from the world of theory into the world of integration, because that's what da'as does. Da'as is the process of translating what I know in a book to what I see as my perspective on life. In other words, what that means is that we all, in our own experience, will know that there are certain times where if an issue arises and we have a dilemma in our lives, we have to consult. I'm not sure, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what the Torah says about such. I'm not talking halacha. Halacha, you always have to consult. Even if you're the greatest expert, you always have to consult for halacha. But I'm talking about just outlook, decision-making, hashkafa, what a Jewish person is supposed to believe. Very often, I'm not sure. I don't know. What are you supposed to do in this particular case? That's not da'as. That means it's not me, it's information. If it's not information, I'm a poor person. I'm constantly going to someone who could feed me information, feed me insight, help me make this decision. When something becomes integrated, becomes clear to us, it becomes part of us, that is da'as, then I'm an oshir. An oshir, a wealthy person, doesn't need somebody else to feed me, doesn't need somebody else to support me. I can stand on my own 2 feet. The goal of Judaism is that all of the Torah that we learn should become da'as. It should become integrated into who we are and how we perceive the world, not just into what we subscribe to. It's not good enough just to subscribe. Now, by the way, we know this from our own experience without even realizing it. We know exactly what it is. Because we know that there are times where something will come up and we'll say, I just know this isn't right. I'm not sure why. But I'm 100% clear this is what needs to happen. That is because I've got da'as, I've got this integration. It's become part of who I am, so I can immediately discern appropriate, inappropriate, right, wrong, healthy, unhealthy, aligned with Judaism, misaligned with Judaism. I'm clear on that. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen easily. We're not talking over here about people who are delusional, which unfortunately also happens when people believe that they know what Judaism says. This is somebody who has invested and spent a tremendous amount of time in learning and integrating what they have learned to the point that it sinks and seeps through into every pore of their being, and they know straight away, it's not on. This is not right, or that is appropriate.
Let's kiss it.
Let's not bring Kesser in just yet. This is da'as. This is what da'as is.
It's sort of like, and that's a very silly example, like, if you become kosher and you integrate that into your life, you'll never eat anything safe again. Like, you'll not.
You mean intentionally? Intentionally.
But with junk food, you can always be convinced to eat junk.
That's a great example. Great example. So to use exactly your example, it's a great example. I heard a story. Apparently it's a true story in Brooklyn. This frum mother and child are standing. You know how it is that just before the checkout, they've always got all the enticing snacks and whatever the case is, standing over there, and there's an African-American mother standing behind her with a little child, and the little child says, please can I have one of those things? And the African-American mother says, no, it's not kosher. So the frum lady turns around and says, what's going on over here? What do you mean it's not kosher? She says, look, I've observed the Jewish people for a long time, and I've learned that when you tell your kids it's not kosher, end of story, no further negotiation, you know? So I decided I'm going to do it in my family also. It's not kosher. That's it. You can't have it, right? But that's exactly the point. That's exactly what da'as is. Something which is not da'as, there's still room for negotiation. Exactly. That's a brilliant example. When a person is on a diet, there's still you have to understand, it's a simcha, there's a mitzvah. We have our thing. I'll have it now, I'll work off the calories tomorrow. There's a whole negotiation. When something is da'as, that's it. There's no further conversation. As they used to say in the old days, when we used to send in those competitions from the back of the cereal boxes, right? No correspondence will be entered into. That's it. Once you send it, it's done. We're not negotiating this. That's what da'as is. Da'as is absolute, not just clarity, because chokhmah can be very clear. Bina can be very clear. Da'as is the difference between what I know and how I see the world. Very different things. It's intrinsic. It's become me. It's become me. So here's an interesting pasuk. The pasuk says, Kirvas Eloikim li toiv. You ever heard this expression? Kirvas Eloikim li toiv. What does it mean? What's Kirvas Eloikim? Closeness to Hashem. Li toiv means it's good for me. Herein lies a very clear distinction between Bina and Da'as. Bina says, Kirvas Eloikim toiv. To be close to Hashem is a good thing, and I can explain it in 4 different ways with a whole thesis. I can tell you what the benefits are, how it makes a difference, why a person should have a relationship with Hashem. I could give a series of classes on the subject. I could be the world-leading expert. Kirvas Eloikim toiv. It's good to be connected to Hashem. Das is Kirvas Eloikim li toiv. This is not an abstract thought that closeness to Hashem is a nice ideal. Li toiv, this is what's good in my life. You know what that looks like different? You know the difference? Person says Kirvas Elokim toiv is the person who's giving great shiurim and still doing things that are not so, The person who says Kirvas Elokim li toiv, this is me, this is what I live for, this is the oxygen that I breathe. That's what Da'as does. Da'as translates something from being an ideal, a concept, a philosophy, into becoming mine. That's why the first time we encounter human experience of Da'as, it's in the context of intimacy. It's an intimacy with the idea. The idea is no longer external. The idea is no longer theoretical. It is intimate. It's intrinsic. It's become part of who I am. That is the great contribution of Da'as. Therefore, until such time as a person experiences Da'as, they cannot have a mature emotional attachment to whatever the idea is. We're talking over here about, the purpose over here is not just simply to understand how the brain works. The purpose over here is to understand how we develop a meaningful connection to Hashem. So it's important for us to understand that if a person wants to have a meaningful connection to Hashem, Da'as will be critical. And that's why we have a mitzvah, that you have to love Hashem your God. And we have a mitzvah that you have to fear Hashem your God. Liras Hashem, we had it in this week's parasha. What is Hashem asking of you? Only to have awe of Hashem. How do you get to any of that? Da'as. Know Hashem, the God of your fathers. Then you'll be able to serve him with a perfect heart. If a person wants the heart on board, if a person wants to have mature emotional attachment, it's going to require Da'as. Now here's the problem. Da'as is very accessible in tangible experiences, and it's very difficult in abstract experiences. In other words, when you've got somebody, for example, there's a whole theory, I don't know if you have to buy this theory or not, but there is such a theory that a person does not succeed in life until they've had a real painful failure in a particular area. And then after you've had the painful failure, then you succeed. Okay, may be true, may not be true, but there's truth within it. And the truth is that gives you da'as, because now you know that was so bad, I will never do that again. Never do that again, right? So that's why, with addiction, for example, you say that the person has to hit rock bottom. They have to reach a point where it's da'as. All the theory in the world, I know I have to change, I should be better. Like we do on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, right? I know I have to change, I should be better, I'll hate this, I'll hate that. But until such time as it becomes da'as, until it's clear to us that Lashon Hara is the same as poison, we're still going to speak Lashon Hara. So it's a theory. We know all the things. We've been to all the shiurim. We've read all the books. We've done the daily Shmiras Halachos or whatever. Until such time as it becomes das, that this is clear to me, that it's absolute. I'm not going to change. So the thing is that in tangible terms, da'as is very accessible. First time that a child touches the hot stove, they get da'as. That you don't touch hot stoves. We don't have to now have a whole philosophy talk with them, about why heat burns your hand. You don't have to tell them. Now they have da'as, right? The first time, whatever it is, I'm sure everybody can think of many, many examples, right? The first time the person does something that feels painful, you now have da'as, and you don't want to do this thing again. But now we're talking about something abstract. We're talking about how do you have da'as about Hashem? Lema'an da'as ki Hashem. How do you know that? How do you know? How do you get Ata Horeisa Lo da'as? So at the time of the giving of the Torah, it says Ata Horeisa. Hashem showed himself to us. So that generation had a bit of an edge. Lo da'as. They were given an opportunity for da'as because it became real to them. But for us, how are we supposed to do this? The Torah is full of these instructions that we have to get da'as in our knowledge of Hashem. How do we get there? So there's only one way. Let's go back to what we spoke about last week. Last week we spoke about having an overwhelming experience. When a person has an overwhelming experience, they can't process immediately what's happened. So how does the person eventually get to process? Again, it could be a negative, God forbid, or a positive experience. Very overwhelming experience. How does the person eventually get to integrate? How do they actually start coming to terms with the experience? So how?
Sinks in.
How does it sink in? What helps to... No, it's not time on its own. People always say time, which is true because it takes... revisiting. So that's why speaking is a cathartic process. When a person's going through a trauma, to talk about it is cathartic because it allows them to revisit, and that helps to consolidate, to make it more tangible, to make it more real, because as long as it's abstract, I can't really deal with it. So you talk and you integrate, and eventually it starts to make a little bit more, I don't want to use the word sense because sometimes it makes no sense, but it starts to become real. That's why, again, when a person first gets married, I don't know if you had this problem, but some people have this problem. When they first get married, it feels weird to say, my husband. Like, it feels weird. I can't get my tongue around those words, You say it enough times, it becomes normal. That's what happens, right? In exactly the same way as it is with habits. Most of our habits, we don't even know how they began. Most of our habits, we don't even know that we're doing it. We don't know what started that habit. But the reality is, at some point, it became part of what we call second nature. It becomes real. It becomes part of me. Da'as is the same. You cannot experience da'as regarding something abstract unless you're constantly revisiting it. So it's not good enough for us, for example, to say, okay, I went to the shir, I heard the concept, it was very compelling, and I think my life has changed. It doesn't work that way. So what do we need? We need a method. We need a method that we could use, especially if we're talking about Hashem, which is a very difficult concept for the human mind to grasp, and is a concept that is very abstract. So what are we supposed to do? We're going to need a lot of chazara. Exactly. Another revisiting. So where do we revisit? What's that?
Let's say talking about this for instance, and then he said, I can't do it with the Yates process, but they already did that. And
right.
You find that and you live it for a few minutes, but then an hour later it comes back to
right. So here we have to make a distinction between practicing a method and experiencing da'as. That's why habit is not the ideal example, because habit is really repeating a behavior. I was just using it to illustrate the point. And in the same way as you repeat a behavior, it eventually becomes part of you. In the same way, you've got to repeat a thought process until eventually that becomes our thought process. So just in the context of Lashon Hora, so there's only one reason we speak Lashon Hora about people. Only one reason. What's the reason? That's not the reason. That's not the reason. There's only one reason. Because what? Insecure in ourselves. That's not the reason.
We don't have the faith in Hashem to know that where we are doing.
This is true. There's one very important insight. The only reason we speak Lashon Hara or experience envy or get angry with people, etc., is because we don't have clarity in the knowledge, not the faith, the knowledge that Hashem orchestrated this.
If we know Hashem is everything,
right?
Then.
So what am I supposed to be working on? My Lashon Hara? Or my thoughts? My awareness.
But the Yetzirah keeps saying no.
Of course.
He keeps visiting you, doesn't matter how many times.
Again, exactly, because the Yetzer Hara is an expert at identifying the method that you're using and using it against you. That's what the Yetzer Haras do really well, right? They identify the method that we're using. And unfortunately, what we do really badly as humans is we repeat the same methods, even when they're not working. And I know that they say that, repeating the same thing, expecting different results is insanity, but you could say that until you put it in the face, everybody still does that. Everybody does that. And the greatest example, I'm going to skip the Lashon Hara thing for 1 second. The greatest example of this is we consistently try the same thing again and again and again and insist that this is how it should be with our kids. And then we wonder why we're not getting through to them, right? And it's only when we can have like a major shift into how we're doing things that anything really changes. So all real change starts with da'as. And it's a question of getting the right da'as. So let me ask you a question. Does Hashem love every one of us? Yes. Did Hashem take the time to create every one of us? Yes. So therefore Hashem feels that every one of us is absolutely valuable, right? Great. We all acknowledge this. Do we have da'as on this topic?
No.
No. Now, if we did, we wouldn't be having such a difficult time speaking Lashon Hara. But it's the da'as that has to shift. So what we need is to use a series of exercises that integrates into our thinking and into our, not just thinking, but our perception. Because da'as means I perceive things differently. If I perceive a person in a particular way, why on earth would I speak badly about them? So there are certain people in our lives we just love so much, we would never speak badly about them. You know why? Because we have da'as that those people are beloved people. The challenge is we have to get to that level of da'as across the board. Okay, you don't have to love everybody equally, but you have to love people enough to recognize, and that our actual view of the world is that person is valuable, that person is the gem of Hashem's eye. Like, why on earth would I speak negatively about that person? Doesn't matter what they've done to me. Why would I speak badly about such a person who's the Eibishter's apple of his eye? So that's what we're talking about with da'as. Da'as fundamentally changes how we experience life. How do we get to da'as? First, you have to have information, because you cannot have da'as in a vacuum. And then you have to revisit that information on a regular basis and actually allow it to seep in the same way as we would do in a therapeutic process where a person has had a trauma and they go for trauma debriefing, where they're encouraged to speak and speak and speak and speak until eventually they're able to put it into perspective and not be haunted by the trauma. In the same way, we need a similar kind of repetitive process that we use with the da'as concept, that eventually it sinks in. This is my reality now. This is my reality.
Can I just ask, it's like praying.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, right?
Because the most important thing is the consistency, the sacrifices, morning, afternoon, night. So if you are praying...
This is true. But there's one more layer. So I agree with it absolutely. If we're going to experience da'as about Hashem, the main place that is designed to create da'as is prayer. And the only problem is, unfortunately, most of us don't know how to daven. And when I say most of us, I say our generation is not a good davening generation. We're also not a great learning generation, but that's another conversation, right? But the reality is we're not. Why? Because we are very distracted and we feel a lot of time pressure, and we believe that davening is please and thank you. So as long as that's my view of davening, I can't use davening as a tool for creating da'as. Now, let's think for a moment that if that is all that davening was, davening would be a lot shorter, because it would be, Hashem, you're really great because of what you've done for me and because of what you've done for the world, and I really need these things, and thank you for the things I already have. And it'd be a lot shorter. But if you look at the structure of the davening, it's actually designed as a meditative tool. The davening is a whole lot of triggers which are supposed to make us think about Hashem a little bit more than just saying lip service. I believe in God, He's the creator, He's amazing, He's infinite, etc. So if we allowed ourselves to ruminate over the concept in davening, which would literally, let me just describe what that looks like. Imagine if we paused on one line of the davening before moving on to the next. Just choose one line a day. We paused on that line and we just blocked out all distraction and just spent 5 minutes, which feels like a very long time when you're davening. Right? in not so long ago generations, people would spend an hour on a line of davening. And I saw with my own eyes, people, great people sitting and davening, and it was literally, they would sit unmoving for hours at a time, focus on one section of the davening. It's like an amazing concept, right? So let's say, for example, we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Everybody knows the most important line out of the davening. The Gemara tells us that as long as you focus with intention on that line, then everything's good. And if you miss the intention on that line, your whole davening is disqualified. It's like a very important line. So let's just work that for a second. We'll use it as a little template, for something that we could possibly try, right? So Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What is the focus of here? What are you supposed to meditate on? What are you supposed to contemplate? Okay, so not love. Love comes next. V'ahavta is the next paragraph. Hashem is one, right? Hashem is one. Is that fair? Hashem is one. Okay, so now imagine if we turn this into a da'as building exercise. Okay, da'as building exercise. Is there anybody here before today who did not believe Hashem Echad? Hashem is one. Is this news? It's not news, right? We all knew this. We all knew that Hashem is one. So the fact that Hashem is one, how did it affect my life today? The fact that Hashem is one. Or maybe it did, maybe it didn't, I don't know. So just in the interest of time, because we don't have enough time to unpack this properly, but just in the interest of time, so you've got Shema Yisrael. Let's start there. Why is it Shema? Why is the word Shema?
Because we must really
Absorb, right? Because if it was just listen, then the word would have been Ha'azinu Yisrael, or Hazen, because it's a singular word. Like we have the parasha Hazinu Hashamayim. Hazen means use your ears, listen. Lend me your ears, as they say, right? If it was pay attention, it would have been Hakshev. The word Shema is a word that is used with an implication of let it sink in, let it absorb. And then who has to listen? Yisrael. Who's Yisrael? Yes, of course you could say Yisrael is us. It's the collective name of the Jewish people. But you know what? Yaakov is also a collective name of the Jewish people. Even Yeshurun is a collective name of the Jewish people. What's the significance of Yisrael? What does Yisrael mean? So one of the things of Yisrael is Li Roish. Li Roish. Right? Which means I have to engage the mind. Right? I have to engage the mind. This is not just an emotive exercise. This is an intellectual exercise. In other words, Shema Yisrael as a combination is telling me that I have to meditate and contemplate on the following concepts. And there are two key concepts in this line. The first is Hashem Elokeinu, and the second is Hashem Echad. So what does Hashem Elokeinu mean? What? Hashem is our God. And Rashi says very simply that right now Hashem is our God. When Mashiach comes, it will be Hashem Echad. Everybody will acknowledge Hashem. But there's a deeper layer to this. We know that Hashem has many names. Each name is supposed to represent a different manifestation of divine energy. So Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei. That is the highest name that we use. That it's so high that we're not even allowed to pronounce it. So we just use another name in its place. You could only pronounce it in the Beis HaMikdash. And when they pronounced it in the Beis HaMikdash, everybody had to prostrate themselves on the floor in complete submission. So Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, besides anything else, contains within it Haya, Hoive, and Yiyeh. Past, present, and future. That means that this is Hashem completely beyond nature, beyond the world. What does Elokeinu mean? Our God. But we also know, Rashi points this out as well, that the word Elokim means powerful. So, our power. That's the first contemplation. The first contemplation that we're supposed to have is that Hashem, who is completely beyond nature, is Elokeinu, is our power. Or sometimes often we use the word Elokim as the name for nature, Hashem's intervention in nature. So Elokeinu, our nature is supernatural. That's the first thing you have to contemplate. That to be Jewish means our nature is supernatural. Now that has a whole lot of applications, not least of which is my Yetzer Hara is natural. And I am supernatural. I'm not trapped by my Yetzer Hara. Now imagine you're supposed to meditate on this 3 times a day, right? In the morning, in the evening, and before you go to bed. So that means I've got to keep reminding myself, I am not bound by the restrictions of nature. I am not a creature or a victim of my habits, or my mistakes, or my misguided perspectives. And then the next part is Hashem Echad, that Hashem is one. Now, my favorite part about Hashem Echad, in the time that we have, is the Mishnah says that Ad Kan Mitzvos Kavona, that this is the only part of the whole davening that you have to have focused intention. Says the Gemara, Kol HaMayrich Be'echad, that when you say the word Echad, which is part of this really important word, anybody who prolongs the word Echad, Mayrichin Lo Yomav Ushnoisav, then they will prolong your life. And then I think it's Rabbi Eliezer who says, Rabbi Yochanan, I don't remember who says, that which part of the word Echad is the part that you're supposed to prolong? The Daled. Listen, I'm sorry to say this, but that's not physically possible. Unless you are Yemenite, unless you're a Taimani, because they distinguish between a Daled with a dot as the, and a Daled without a dot as the, then you could do it. Echad. You could do that, right? But for us, Echad, you can't prolong it. So you get this ridiculous thing that people do, Echad, but the Shulchan Aruch says very clearly, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to make it sound like there's another letter after the Dalet, or like there's a vowel under the Dalet. So how's it supposed to work? So listen to this. It's a mind-blowing thought. We're told that Echad, the reason the word Echad is used instead of the word Yochid, which would mean that Hashem is the only one, Echad could belong to a sequence. So the reason it's Echad, Chazal tell us, is because the Aleph represents the oneness of Hashem. The Ches, which has a numerical value of 8, represents the 7 heavens and earth. And the Daled, which has a numerical value of 4, represents the 4 directions. So Kol HaMayrich Be'echad, the Gemara continues, means, what does it mean to extend the Daled? You have to extend the Daled until you are Mamrich HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'mayla or L'mata or L'Daled Ruchos. It has to be the amount of time that it takes for you to acknowledge Hashem's sovereignty over heaven, earth, and all the 4 directions. What does that mean? So very, very briefly, and I'm taking a big concept and really condensing it. Very briefly, we live in a 3-dimensional world, yes? But a lot of what we experience in the world is 2 dimensions, which are what we call breadth and length. But if it were a 3-dimensional illustration, we'd have that, you can't really see it so nicely, right? But we'd have the third plane, which is depth. Okay? So you have length, breadth, and depth. So breadth is horizontal, depth is into, and length is vertical. Kol HaMayrich Be'echad, anybody who extends the Echad, that's length. Length is vertical. Vertical means taking something from above, from being abstract, and bringing it down below to become real. So the idea that Hashem is one, the idea that Hashem is in charge, the idea that Hashem empowers us to not be bound by nature, Kol HaMayrich Be'echad, anybody who brings that down into their normal day-to-day experience, in other words, they have da'as about Hashem's oneness, Mayrichin Lo Yomav Ushnoisav, Hashem will give that person long life. So there's a little example of where we are given a trigger in the davening to assist us to have da'as in Hashem's greatness. So what is da'as? Da'as is when it becomes my reality rather than my information. And how do we do it? By repeating the thought process around these ideas again and again and again until they start to sink in and until they start to become real to us. And when they do, everything changes.